Brewster here, new episode of Chordplay. This is the chords of Smashing Pumpkins, and I've had some requests to feature this legendary alt-rock band. And the Smashing Pumpkins are from my hometown, Chicago, Illinois, and they formed in 1988. During the course of their career, they've released 13 studio albums, 7 EPs, 10 live albums, 6 compilations. They've sold over 30 million albums worldwide. They've won Grammy Awards and VMAs and a bunch of stuff. I think they have over 30 music videos, a lot of music videos from the Pumpkins. In my introduction to this band, it's kind of funny. I think I've shared this story before. I was teaching guitar in the mid-90s, and I had a Dokken lesson that was really popular with a lot of my students. It had riffs and cool chords and stuff in it. And I had a new student that came in, and he had lessons before. So I remember I kind of talked to him, and I pulled out the Dokken lesson. He looked at it and kind of scrunched his face, and he was like, "Can we learn something else?" And I remember this is the first student I ever had that rejected my Dokken lesson. I was like, "You don't want to learn this?" And he was like, "No, I don't really like Dokken." I was like, "Well, what do you want to learn?" And he was like, "Do you know any Smashing Pumpkins?" And of course, at that time, I knew zero Smashing Pumpkins, and I was on the spot. And then immediately, started kind of checking out the band, trying to figure out who they were, because they were relatively new on the scene, at least for me. And that was my introduction to the band, like in the mid-90s, 1995, 96. So over the course of the history of the Smashing Pumpkins, they've had some lineup changes, and they've kind of mixed things around a little bit. And most recently, I've been following this on Facebook, but Kiki Wong has joined as a new guitarist in the band, and they did a US tour near the end of last year, and they're getting ready to embark on a European and world tour this year. I think that starts next month in July. But definitely, it's really interesting to notice, like, the new member of Smashing Pumpkins. So the chord-based and rhythm guitar examples in this episode came from 3 classic Smashing Pumpkins albums, and I'm basically selecting riffs and chord parts and songs that I've had lots of students ask for over the years. Because really, when I think about it, I've had lots of students that liked Smashing Pumpkins and would ask for certain songs. And there's some interesting things that Billy does on guitar. He's kind of a dissonant architect, because he finds like major sevenths and flat fives and ninths and things like that where he adds to a chord or a chord progression, and he twists things around. It's like the Smashing Pumpkins twist. So we're going to hit that. We're also going to hit briefly the Smashing Pumpkins chord in this episode too. So if you're a fan, buckle up, because here we go. With the opening, that was I Am One from the album Gish, and I've always liked that song and the riff. Something like this. Actually starting with Alex Lifeson's Xanadu chord, F sharp 11 right there. So you literally strum on the bottom part and then pick the G and the open B. Like that. But think of that very famous Xanadu chord. You can also find that in Rooster by Alice in Chains and a ton of other songs. But right there, let it ring, and then you're going to open up that low E string. So you could think of that like an F sharp 11 over E, or you could think of that related to E, like an E6 sus2 sharp 11 right there. And then like that, the G, the open B, and the open high E with that chord. So that's the first part. Let it ring, and then hit it. Like that. Do it again. Pick scrape, and then you got this F sharp power chord right there, and you're banging off the low E open, and then move up to that A power chord right there. So you're doing this kind of punky, thrashy, and the second time, move that A to B right there, and then just start moshing that riff. Then you got this busy number. So right there, you're just bouncing off the low E to the open E, and then that's where he sneaks in the Smashing Pumpkins chord right there. So just think of that related to E major. You're playing the low E open and then a G sharp octave, right? So that is technically a chord, even though it's really just an octave with a low, string ringing under it, but it's part of E major. And that D to E right there, and then repeat that. And right there, go back to Xanadu. Definitely, that song kicks ass, and I love those atmospheric, dreamy kind of chords. Really cool. Next up's the song Cherub Rock from the album Siamese Dream, and it's something like this. Something like that. So it starts with this really deceptive octave thing where he's playing the low E open and then an E octave like that. And then an E power chord blasted the same way. Here's the Smashing Pumpkins chord, that E major. Then take that, move it up to a B. Now it's like a glorified E5. And then an octave riff right here. Right? Like that F sharp to E. And then this G sharp to A. And then a stack like D5 over A to A5. Really cool riff, cool song, and I dig like the kind of weird octave, and then once again that appearance of the Smashing Pumpkins chord. Really cool stuff. Next up's the song Here Is No Why from the album Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and this is tuned down a half step. Now I did give you the tuning notice at the beginning of this lesson, and I forgot to mention this, but the first two examples are in standard tuning, the next three are tuned down a half step, and then the last example in this lesson is back in standard tuning again. So just a heads up. And Here Is No Why is something like this. Something like that. So really interesting chords here. So it starts with this A major 7, which is very unusual to hear in rock, but in the 90s grungy alternative days, major 7th chords made lots of appearances actually, but right there. So you're doing this like strum, muted strums, like with the open A. And then this kind of a single note melody, and then go to E major, So right there, E major, then add that F sharp on top, like in E major, add 9. Slide into that G sharp and go right back to A major 7 again. Doing that same A major, 7 riff. When you get to the E, then you're going to slide octaves there, that B to C sharp and back, and then this D5, D flat 5, D5 to an A, right? And then it technically repeats again. Interesting riff. I like the kind of twisted chords, and that is kind of a signature sound coming from Smashing Pumpkins. Next up's the main riff from the song Zero. This is also from the Melancholy album, and this song is the most popular Smashing Pumpkins request I've had from students over the years. It seems like everybody wants to learn this one, like this. Something like that. So it's really interesting. We've got octaves once again. Billy definitely seems really fond of using octaves in his riffs. That C to B, and then we're doing harmonics bouncing along the low E right there. So it's like one somewhere around like between the second and third fret, somewhere between the third and fourth, between the fourth and fifth, and the fifth right there. Like that. Like that. So it's once on that C to B and then the harmonics, and then twice on the C to B and then the harmonics, and that's the first part. And then these octaves up here, we've got. So he's making like a riff, but it's octaves. E to F sharp, E to G, and then slide that F sharp to D like that. And then you want to go for a ride, and then interesting song and a cool riff too. Next up's Bullet with Butterfly Wings from the Melancholy album, and this is the second most popular request I've had from students over the years as far as Smashing Pumpkins riffs and songs. It seems like everybody wants to learn this one too, and it's really cool, like this. Quiet kind of opening and verse, section, and it's really interesting because Billy's grabbing, like partial implied chords throughout that entire riff. It starts with B, right? So you can hear like the bass notes changing, like B to A and then that G to E, right? And there's implied chords there. B5, that's like an A6 sus2 implied. And then right there, that's like G major 7 right there. And then an E sus2 like that. So that's really interesting to have a power chord and then you're treating it and implying all these different chords just by changing the root note. end with that A6 sus2 right there, and repeat that whole thing again right here. Change, start on the B, then go to E, then to G, and then the A6 sus4. So it's the same chords, just reworked in a different order. Like that. Really interesting chord part, and I'm a sucker for parts like that where they take a chord and then they start changing and mutating, maybe adding open strings, changing the root note, something. But that's really interesting, and that's definitely something you're going to catch from Billy Corgan a lot, like these twisted chords and kind of mutations on the fretboard, which is so cool. Okay, last but not least is the song Soma from the album Siamese Dream, and we're back in standard tuning now, so we're no longer tuned down a half step. And I think this is my favorite Smashing Pumpkins song. I've definitely been listening to their music for decades, but then putting this episode together and kind of listening to their music again, it's like, yeah, I think Soma is my favorite. And there's two guitarists here, so I'm going to use the MXR clone looper to kind of help me out. And guitar one is doing... spacey. It's really cool. So it's like an implied B major right there, like B major over F sharp. So just think of like a Johnny Cash E major chord and put it on the 8th and 9th fret. Don't play the low or high E, and that's the chord right there. So like B over F sharp, and he's picking the first two strings and then strumming the D, the G, and that open B string. And then the D and the G again, and then you're going to an E sus2. Right there, that's G major, like this. Which, that's a really cool way to play G major. You got 3 fretted notes and that open B string right there. And kind of doing that like the bottom 2 notes of the chord are separate and the top 2 are together. Like that. So really slowly there. That's guitar 1, that's what the MXR clone looper is going to play, and then guitar 2 comes in and does this kind of harmony, like twisted version of what we just played, like this. So it actually starts with that same chord, that B over F sharp, and then a hammer on right there, that B to C sharp, and then grab this D sharp, and then like part of that E. So right there you're implying that E sus2 chord, but you're doing it like, right, like that, the high E kind of sneaking in there, and then you're playing this like melodic figure with the open B. So one more time, there's guitar 2. And then when you put that with guitar 1, you hear Soma. episode of Chordplay with this look at the chords of Smashing Pumpkins. Definitely a very interesting band. Billy's a really interesting guitarist, and I'm kind of anxious and curious what they're going to do on their tour. You know, him playing with Kiki Wong and James Iha in the mix too. But it's really interesting to kind of notice these dissonant sounds and unusual textures and chords and tonalities, you know, hiding in this music. And he goes all the way back to the beginning with Gish, and you can hear Billy doing this on every album. And he does have like this kind of signature, you know, style or approach using octaves, dissonant intervals, and these kind of dreamy chords and stuff like that. And of course, bashing out power chords and really rocking out too. But definitely, Smashing Pumpkins have a little bit of everything, which is cool. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Layout Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.